Every frame you notice, every story that holds you, every idea that moves culture, there's a system behind it. This is EMPath with Carolyn and Beau, where creativity meets strategy and careers are built with intention. Breaking down the tools, the workflows, and the decisions shaping creative careers. New episodes every Wednesday at 7 a.m. EMPath. Feel the creativity.
This is EMPath, and I'm Carolyn
And I'm Beau.
Feel the creativity.
This episode is brought to you by Neon Alchemy. Story is how companies become human. We handle that part. Link in the show notes. New episodes every Wednesday at 7 a.m. Find us wherever you listen.
So this is it, Season 1 finale. 10 episodes behind us and one very large idea we've been holding back until today.
The one we've been circling since episode 1 without ever saying it out loud.
10 episodes ago, we started the show with a simple promise. We'd hand you the parts of a creative career nobody puts in a job posting, the stuff that's running underneath the work, whether anyone points at it or not.
And every week since, we've handed you one piece of that. A move, a pattern, something you'd already been feeling but couldn't quite point to yourself.
Hierarchy, repetition and variation, misdirection, constraint, manual reversion, chain of title, scaffolding, continuing education, the founder narrative, and needs analysis.
10 of them. 10 different weeks, 10 different fields, 10 different problems that all somehow needed the same kind of eye.
And if you've been with us since episode 1, you've probably noticed something we never pointed out. Each move showed up in a different industry, but it never felt like we were starting over.
There was always a version for film, a version for post, a version for whatever I do with a deck of cards on a weekend. Same shape, different costume.
Which is a strange thing for 10 unrelated topics to keep doing if they're actually unrelated.
That's the thread we're pulling today, and it isn't a highlight reel. There's a reason we saved this for last instead of doing it in episode 1.
Because you couldn't have seen it in episode 1. It only shows up once you've collected enough of these to lay them side by side.
No spoilers this early, but by the end of today's deep dive, you're going to look back at this whole season differently.
Every field we covered, film, animation, games, publishing, advertising, magic, was teaching the same lesson in a different accent.
And we're closing the season the same way we opened it, with us. No guest carrying this one.
Because the season finale should tell you something true about the people making the show, not just the ideas the show's been chasing.
So today's format looks a little different. Same 7 segments, same clock, but one of them is doing something new.
Every other week, that segment's been about you. Your work, your questions, your career moments, the wins and the hard parts both.
Today it flips. We're the ones in the spotlight, and we're not going to make ourselves look better than we actually did.
10 weeks of building this show taught us plenty we didn't expect to learn. Some of it flattering, some of it not.
We'll get into all of that later in the show. For now, back to the season.
Before we get there, a quick thank you. This show started as 2 people and a microphone. It's not just that anymore.
The inbox has grown every single week. More questions, more stories, more people telling us a move landed for them at exactly the right moment.
That kind of response is rare for a show still finding its footing, and we don't take it lightly.
Which is exactly why today's honesty segment felt necessary instead of optional. You've trusted us with your stories all season.
Fair to hand you ours before we close it out.
First, the trend that's been sitting quietly under this entire season without us ever calling it out directly.
Which turns out to connect to almost everything we're about to walk through.
Let's get into it.
You're listening to EMPath, where creativity meets strategy and the path forward gets clearer. What's changing? What's staying? What actually matters? This is Industry Pulse.
So here's the trend we teased. It's not one industry, it's every industry we've covered this season, and it's showing up in the hiring data whether anyone's recognizing it or not.
Which is very on brand for a season about things nobody names.
Robert Half's latest research on marketing and creative hiring found nearly 2/3 of leaders are actively expanding permanent headcount this year, with even more planning to bring on contract help on top of that.
Sounds like a good year to be job hunting in this industry.
It should be, except the same report found nearly half of these leaders saying it's harder to find skilled people than it was 12 months ago. More open roles and a tighter pool at the same time.
Harder even with more roles open? That's a mismatch, not just a shortage.
Right, and the report gets more specific about where. It's not entry-level roles sitting open, it's the roles that need someone who can already think independently on day one. Nobody wants to train that from scratch anymore. They want to hire it already built.
Which is a rough note for anyone early career listening to this, if I'm being real, because that's exactly the thing you're supposed to be building right now.
And there's a report out just this month for major players that gets specific about the shape of that mismatch. 7 in 10 businesses now rank AI and technical fluency as the single most important skill for their workforce going forward.
Which sounds like it contradicts everything we've been saying all season about judgment over tools.
Except the same report is clear that craft and taste are still fundamentally important. The creatives actually landing roles are the ones who've paired that craft with AI fluency, not replaced one with the other.
So it's not tool versus judgment. It's judgment that now has to include knowing the tool.
Right. And there's a talent mobility number in that same report that caught my eye. People planning to move roles next year just hit the highest level ever recorded.
Meaning the people who can actually do the thing employers are short on are about to have a lot more leverage than they think they have right now.
Which is a real thing to consider if you've been feeling stuck in a role. The market's shifting under everyone's feet at once, and staying put isn't automatically the safe option anymore.
Though moving for the sake of moving isn't the answer either. It's leverage if you actually have the thing employers are short on, it's just risk if you don't.
There's a study that came out in June from Accenture Song, surveying over 1,700 executives across 14 countries, and it names a gap that connects directly to what we've been circling all season.
Go on.
81% of leaders say their organization can generate creative ideas. Only 16% say they actually consistently turn those ideas into anything that moves business.
So the idea was never the bottleneck. Having good ideas was never the rare part.
The rare part is exactly what we've spent 10 episodes describing, seeing the structure, the hierarchy, the constraint, the gap clearly enough to actually act on it.
Which lines up with something else in that report. A majority of executives said they know a colleague held back for a creative approach, and over half said it happened to them personally.
The idea gets generated in the room and then dies somewhere between the room and the decision. The gap is the whole season in one statistic.
Picture the version of that meeting. Someone pitches the sharper idea, the room nods, and then the safer version ships anyway because nobody could point to exactly why the sharp one was actually right, just that it felt right.
Which is precisely the gap we've been describing. Feeling the right structure isn't the same as being able to point at it and defend it under pressure.
And the companies that actually close that gap aren't winning by a little. The ones converting ideas consistently were dramatically more likely to outperform on revenue, engagement, and brand equity.
There's a newer piece of this too. Creative Boom ran their annual industry survey and published it about a month ago, and one number in there stopped me.
Which one?
86% of creatives are already using AI tools day to day. But when you ask them what would actually improve their working life, tools rank dead last.
What beat it?
Community and networking by a wide margin. Mentorships close behind. People, not software, when you ask what actually moves things forward.
Which is a strange thing for a tired, AI-saturated industry, but it tracks with everything else this season. The tool was never the missing piece.
Post-production adapting to a pipeline that's different every year. Instructional design adapting to a field that never holds still. A magician adapting to a routine on the fly when a prop fails mid-set.
Which has happened to me more than once, and nobody in the room ever knows unless I tell them.
That's the point of this segment, actually. We'll get there.
It shows up in publishing too. A manuscript that gets rejected isn't usually rejected for weak sentences. It's rejected because the writer couldn't see the shape of the market it was landing in.
Same in games. A prototype can be technically flawless and still fail because nobody on the team could read where the fun actually lived once players got their hands on it.
And in advertising, the campaign that flops usually flops for the same reason. Somebody executed a brief nobody stopped to question first.
And design fits right in here too. A brand refresh can hit every deliverable on the checklist and still land flat because nobody caught that the actual problem was trust, not visuals.
What's interesting is none of these are skill failures. In the traditional sense, every person involved could probably pass a technical test on their craft with room to spare.
Which is exactly the point. Technical skills and structure reading are two completely different axes, and this season's whole argument is that the industry has only been measuring one of them.
7 different fields, 7 different job titles, and every single failure traces back to the same missing thing. Somebody didn't see the structure they were actually operating inside.
Let's get practical for a second, because none of this means much if it stays abstract. If you're early in your career and seeing this data, the instinct is usually to go get one more certificate, one more tool on the resume.
Which isn't wrong exactly, it's just not where the actual gap is, based on everything we just walked through.
Right. The gap isn't tool fluency, it's the ability to walk into a messy, half-defined problem and figure out what's actually being asked before anyone hands you a spec.
Which you can't really certify. There's no course called Reading the Room that nobody's explaining to you correctly.
There sort of is, actually. It's called doing the unglamorous version of a job long enough to see its patterns. Less exciting than a certificate, but it's the true one.
And if you're further along and already have the depth, this data is your permission slip to stop underselling the range you've built alongside it. Companies are paying for exactly that combination right now.
That's also weirdly the honest version of what we've been talking to you about all season. Not collect 10 tricks, build one eye for structure and practice using it everywhere.
So that's the trend. 5 separate reports, most of them barely a month old, all circling the same conclusion from different angles. The market is starting to pay for the thing this season has been teaching you to notice.
which means everything we're about to walk through in Deep Dive isn't just a nice way to close out the season. It's the actual shape of where the work is heading.
The data's just the first place it became visible enough to measure.
The industry keeps changing. The patterns underneath it don't. This is EMPath. "10 weeks of tools and workflows come down to one habit." This is Deep Dive.
10 moves, 10 weeks. We're not going to reteach any of them, but we're hitting every single one fast. Lightning round. I'll start. Hierarchy. A movie poster is a hierarchy document before anyone buys a ticket. Whatever's biggest is the studio's bet on what actually sells the film. And that bet doesn't always match what the film's actually about. Sometimes the marketing department and the director are betting on two completely different movies.
Never thought about a poster that way, and I've stared at plenty outside theaters. And before I go further, we owe everyone a correction. Repetition and variation was move number 2 this season, and we skipped right past it in last week's recap, so it gets its due now. A title sequence that repeats a motive every episode and shifts one element each time is teaching you the show's rules without a single line of dialogue. Repetition builds the expectation. Variation is where the meaning lives.
Which is the same principle behind every running gag, every reoccurring shot, every callback in a season of television. The audience learns the pattern so the break in the pattern can land.
Misdirection. Every studio pitch meeting has a running order, and the weakest slide almost always gets buried in the middle on purpose. Same principle as a trick. Attention has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the middle is where things get hidden, because that's where an audience's guard drops lowest.
Which explains a few pitches I've sat through. Okay, constraint. A stand-up set with zero backup material isn't more fearless for having no safety net. It's one dead room away from collapsing. The best comics build the fallback bit before they ever need it, and most audiences never clock that the improvised save was actually rehearsed for exactly this moment.
Comics planning for the dead room before it happens. Manual reversion. Every live broadcast has a manual fallback, buried in the control room, a director ready to cut to a static shot or pre-recorded tape if the feed drops mid-show. Almost nobody rehearses it enough. The ones who do are the ones still on air when it actually breaks, and the audience at home never even notices the save happened.
That one should scare more people than it does. Okay, chain of title. It's the entire reason sampling in music requires clearance before release. Someone has to trace who actually owns every 4 bars, or the finished song can get pulled the day it counts most. A hit single has been shelved for over 4 unlicensed seconds before.
The day it counts most? Exactly. Okay, scaffolding. A showrunner who's still writing every single episode themselves 2 seasons in didn't build scaffolding for their writer's room. They built dependence. The whole goal is working yourself out of needing to be in every draft, and you can tell a healthy writer's room by how little the showrunner has to touch by season 3.
Ouch. And also fair. On to continuing education. It's the reason this exact question we keep circling back to, what AI actually does to creative jobs, still doesn't have a clean answer. Nobody's finished learning what the tool even is yet, including the people building it, which means the syllabus for this one is being written in real time by everyone at once.
The founder narrative. A first-time director doing press at a festival is compressing years of struggle into a 90-second answer at a Q&A, and most have never once rehearsed it before the microphone finds them. The good ones learn fast that the same 3 beats work every time. What almost broke them, who believed in it anyway, what it means now that it exists.
I'm rehearsing mine right now just listening to you say that. Alright, needs analysis. Ours from last week. It's the same instinct a studio executive uses reading script coverage. Not fixing every note, not the loudest note, figuring out which single fix actually saves the project, and being right about the order those fixes happen in.
10 moves, 10 brand new angles, and every single one of them is really about the same thing underneath. Seeing what's actually happening in a system before anyone hands you a label for it.
Which we could have said in week 1 and saved everyone 10 weeks, except nobody would have believed us. And if we're being real, we hadn't fully believed it ourselves yet either.
You have to actually walk through all 10 to feel it. Just hearing the sentence isn't the same as watching it happen 10 separate times in 10 separate rooms.
So here's the question underneath all of it. If hierarchy, repetition, and variation, misdirection, constraint, manual reversion, chain of title, scaffolding, continuing education, the founder narrative, and needs analysis are really just one skill wearing 10 different costumes,
what does that skill actually look like once you strip every costume off?
10 weeks of this show, and we're about to find out together.
Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Carolyn and this is EMPath, where creativity meets infrastructure. If you're building something in entertainment media right now, you probably feel the pressure. The tools keep changing, the expectations keep rising, and it can start to feel like you're always one update behind. So let me say this clearly. You don't need every new tool. You need a system. It's easy to think progress looks like downloading the latest plugin or signing up for another beta platform. But the people who move forward in this industry, they know how to move an idea from concept to delivery, cleanly, confidently, repeatedly. That's what hiring managers notice. That's what creative directors remember. And yes, we have to talk about AI. There's so much noise around it. Fear, hype, big promises. Here's the more grounded truth. AI is becoming part of the workflow. Ignoring it doesn't protect you. Letting it do all the thinking doesn't elevate you. The advantage is integration. Use it to accelerate, to experiment, to refine. But let your judgment lead, your taste, your sense of story. That's still yours. And one more thing, your portfolio. It's not an archive or a scrapbook. It's a signal. It should tell people where you're going, not just where you've been. If you want motion design, lead with motion. If you want creative tech, show how you think. If you want leadership, show your process. Be intentional. If you're working full-time and studying at night or pivoting careers and betting on yourself, I see you. This industry moves fast, but it rewards clarity. Creativity gets you in the room, strategy helps you stay. I'm Carolyn and Beau, and this is EMPath. Feel the creativity.
You saw it, you felt it, but you didn't notice it. This is the invisible move.
Every one of those 10 moves asks you to notice a structure that was already there before anyone handed you a label for it. That's not 10 separate skills. That's one skill used 10 times in 10 different costumes. This week's invisible move, the last one of the season, is reading the structure before it has a label.
Which sounds almost too simple to be the answer to a whole season.
It sounded that way to me too. Simple sentences are suspicious in a way that means you maybe haven't found the hard part yet, or you're about to.
So where's the hard part in this one? Because I want to know before we go handing it to people as the big finale answer.
It's simple to say. It's brutal to actually do, because it means noticing the hierarchy, the constraint, the gap, in real time, before there's a framework handing you the answer. Every guest we've had on the show this season had the instinct running before they ever had a word for it.
And it's not free to skip either. What actually happens on a project when nobody in the room has this?
Everyone waits for the brief to explain itself instead of reading what the room already knows. You get the work that technically answers the assignment and still somehow misses the point entirely, and nobody can say exactly why until it's too late to fix cheaply.
Which is expensive in a way that never shows up on the invoice. It shows up 3 drafts later or 3 months later when the whole thing has to get rebuilt from a version everyone should have caught on day one.
And it's rarely one person's fault when it happens, which is almost worse. It's usually a whole chain of people, each individually doing their job correctly and nobody owning the gap between them.
And it compounds. A team that misses the structure once usually misses it again the next project, because nobody stopped to ask why the rebuild happened in the first place. It just gets filed away as a rough quarter.
Whereas a team that catches it once starts catching it earlier every time after, because now somebody in the room is actually looking for it instead of waiting to be told.
Which is really the entire difference between a team that burns out chasing revisions and a team that ships something close to right on the first real pass. Same people, same budget, same deadline, different eye in the room. So walk it through the disciplines, because this is going to look different depending on where you're standing when you use it.
Film first, since it's your world. A cinematographer doesn't wait for a director to spell out the emotional beat of a scene. You're reading it off the blocking, the light, the actor's face, and lighting the shot for a feeling nobody said out loud yet. Miss that read, and the coverage is technically correct and emotionally empty.
Which happens more than people think, if we're being real. Footage that's perfectly exposed and perfectly framed and somehow says nothing. Magic runs on the same clock, just faster. I have about 1.5 seconds to read whether a spectator is leaning in or bracing for a trick. And the whole routine shifts off that read, sometimes mid-sentence, before they even know they've tipped their hand.
Instructional design gets a slower version of the same thing. You're watching where a learner's attention actually goes, not where the lesson plan assumes it goes, and rebuilding the structure around what you're seeing instead of what you designed on paper. The best designers treat the lesson plan as a first draft, not a finished blueprint, and they're comfortable throwing out a slide request if the room needs something else.
And post-production is the one nobody expects. An editor reading a scene that isn't working yet before there's a note from anyone, and knowing the fix is in the cut rhythm and not the performance. That's the same read, just running on footage instead of a room, and the good ones can point to the exact frame where the audience checks out, sometimes down to a handful of frames either way.
Publishing has its own version too. A good editor can feel a manuscript sliding off its market before a single sales figure exists to prove it, sometimes years before the market itself has caught up to why. By the time the numbers agree with them, the book's already been on shelves for a season.
Games does it in real time with actual strangers in the room. A playtester watching where a player's hands go, not where the design doc says they're supposed to go, and rewriting the level around what actually happened instead of defending what was planned. Ego doesn't survive a playtest. The data's sitting right there on the controller.
In advertising, which is maybe the sneakiest version, a good account lead can hear the fear underneath the client's notes, the thing they're actually worried about that never makes the brief, and build the pitch around that instead of the brief itself. Half the job is translation between what was said and what was meant.
And design, which is the one that ties everything else together. Because design is how all of this actually gets made. A good designer reads the unstated brand tension in a project before a client can articulate it themselves, and builds toward the version of the idea nobody said out loud yet, sometimes before the client has fully admitted to it themselves. You can watch it happen in a single meeting, the moment a client sees their own unstated idea reflected back at them.
8 fields now, and every single person doing this well would probably tell you they're just good at their job. Not one of them would call it a skill with a name.
Which is exactly why it took us 10 episodes to even start pointing at it. And if I'm being real about this season, it took me most of it to see it in myself too. Not just in the guests we were talking to.
Same. I spent the first half of the season thinking each week's move was its own separate thing to learn. Even sitting across from you doing the Chain of Title episode, I thought we were making a point about rights and clearance specifically.
I had a version of that during the misdirection episode. I genuinely thought I was just talking about magic that week. Didn't clock it was the same eye running underneath everything else until much later.
Which makes me wonder how many other things we've talked about this season without realizing we were talking about the same thing twice. Probably more than we'll really ever actually catch.
That's a slightly unsettling thought to leave people with, but also kind of the whole point of the show. We don't catch everything either.
You can't put this one on a syllabus, and that's the part that makes it invisible. Every other move this season had a name from some other field we could borrow. This one doesn't have a home discipline. It's the thing underneath all the disciplines.
Which means the real work isn't collecting 10 tricks. It's noticing you were already using the same eye on all of them.
Which is a strange note to end the season on, because it means we can't hand you a finished toolkit. We can only tell you that the eye was already yours the whole time, whether you used it on purpose yet or not.
That's either the most reassuring thing we've said all season, or the most unsettling, depending on how you're wired. Probably a little of both.
Both feels right. Reassuring because you didn't fail to learn something this season. You were already doing it. Unsettling because now you can't pretend you don't know it's there.
Which is really the whole deal with any real skill. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And now you're responsible for using it well instead of just accidentally.
10 episodes handed you 10 words for something you'd already been doing without one. That's not nothing. Having the word changes how deliberately you can use it.
10 moves, 1 skill, 1 season. Not bad for 10 episodes of work, even with the timing fights and the retakes and everything else we're about to admit to.
That's the invisible move.
Better workflows don't just shape the process, they shape the outcome. This is EMPath. Creative work doesn't build careers, direction does. This is career strategy.
So that's the season laid out end to end. Now let's make it useful, because a skill you can't apply is just a nice theory. How do you actually use structure reading in your own career?
Start with the gap almost nobody checks. The job posting versus what the team actually needs. Those are two different documents, even when they're printed on the same page.
Wait, explain that, because on the surface, a posting should just be a posting.
A posting gets written by whoever has time to write it, usually early, usually before the team even fully knows what's missing. By the time you're interviewing, the actual gap has drifted. Maybe the last hire left and now it's 2 roles crammed into 1 listing.
So the posting is a snapshot of a need from weeks ago, and you're being interviewed against a need that's already moved.
Exactly, which means the candidates who ask sharp questions in the room read the current gap live instead of just answering to the posting on the page.
What does that question actually sound like, though? Because what does success look like in this role is the one everyone's been told to ask, and it's gone stale.
It has, because it's asking them to describe the job. Better question? What's the thing that's currently not getting done because nobody has time for it? That answer tells you the real gap, not the polished version.
And you can tell how honest the answer is by whether it comes fast or slow. A fast answer means they've been thinking about this gap for a while, and it's real. A slow answer usually means you just made someone improvise on the spot.
Which is its own useful signal. If nobody in the interview can answer that question quickly, that's the gap right there. Nobody's actually diagnosed what's missing yet.
That's a needs analysis question, basically, just aimed inward instead of at a project. You're doing to the interview what we spent all of last week doing to a creative brief.
Same move, different room. It doesn't stop being useful just because the thing you're analyzing is your own job.
Let's talk about after you get the role, because the gap doesn't close once you're hired. It just changes shape. This is where the unspoken hierarchy actually shows up.
In a design team, this is brutal. Nobody tells you who actually has to sign off on the direction versus who just gets looped in for visibility. You find out the hard way, usually after you've already shipped the wrong version.
Same in animation. There's an official approval chain on paper, and then there's the one person whose reaction in a dailies review actually decides whether a shot survives.
And that person changes project to project, which is the maddening part. You can't just learn that chart once. You have to reread it every single time you land on a new show.
Which is exhausting to hear, but also kind of the whole argument for why it has to be a skill and not a checklist. A checklist will go stale the moment the project changed.
And in games, it's whoever the studio actually trusts with taste, which usually isn't the person with the fanciest title. New hires waste months pitching to the wrong desk.
Post-production has its own quiet version. There's an official sign-off chain listed in the pipeline doc, and then there's the one supervisor whose offhand comment in a review determines whether a cut ships or gets reworked.
Advertising's version is sneakier still. The client contact who signs the invoice is rarely the person whose gut reaction decides if a campaign lives or dies internally.
So how does a new hire read that in the first 90 days without just asking someone to draw them an org chart, which nobody's going to do anyway?
Watch whose name comes up unprompted. In every meeting, somebody gets referenced who isn't in the room. Let me check with so-and-so. That's the hierarchy telling on itself before anyone states it out loud. And it's such an easy signal to miss if you're focused on the actual meeting content instead of who gets name dropped. Once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. It's low-key, the org chart that actually runs things. The real one's just running underneath it, and it's usually more accurate.
There's a version of this for freelancers too, which is a different kind of reading. You don't get 90 days. You get one project to figure out who the actual decision maker is versus who just relays notes.
Advertising freelancers learn this fast. The person emailing you revisions isn't always the person who can approve the work. Chase the wrong signature, and you'll polish something that was never going to get picked anyway.
Publishing has a quiet version too. An agent relays an editor's notes, but the acquiring decision sits with someone in an acquisitions meeting the writer will never see.
Even magic gigs have this. The person booking you isn't always the person deciding whether you get rebooked. Sometimes it's a guest at the table you never even talked to directly.
Post-production freelancers have a version too. The producer who hired you isn't always the one whose opinion decides if you get called back. Sometimes it's a director you only meet once in a single review session.
So across every field, freelance or full-time, the skill is the same. Figure out who's actually deciding, not who's officially listed as deciding, and aim your best work at that person.
Here's the piece people miss though. This isn't about playing politics. It's about respecting your own effort enough to point it somewhere it can actually land.
Which is a much healthier way to say it than figure out who to suck up to. This is closer to just aiming carefully.
One more layer before we close this out. Once you can read the room, the next skill is being honest with yourself about what you're seeing, even when it's inconvenient.
Meaning if the real gap on a team is something you're not equipped to fill yet, structure reading should tell you that too, not just hand you an angle to exploit.
There's a whole other layer that we haven't touched yet, and it's the one that trips people up most. Unstated expectations. Not the ones in your job description, the ones nobody wrote down because everybody assumed you just know.
Give me an example, because that sounds abstract until you're the one missing the expectation.
A junior editor gets hired for post-production and assumes the job is cutting footage well. Nobody tells them the unstated expectation is also managing up, flagging problems before a producer has to ask about them.
Same thing happens to junior designers constantly. The stated job is producing clean work on brief. The unstated job is protecting the creative direction in a room full of people trying to water it down.
And nobody puts that in the job posting because people writing the posting have usually forgotten they're even doing it themselves anymore. It's invisible to them too.
Which is the whole season in a sentence. The people best at something are often the worst at explaining what they're actually doing, because it stopped feeling like a skill to them a long time ago.
So if you're listening and trying to turn all of this into something you can do this week, here's the version that fits on a sticky note. Read the gap, not the posting.
Watch who gets referenced, not who's on the chart.
Ask what's not getting done, not what success looks like.
And once you're in the room, notice the job nobody wrote down, because that's usually the actual job.
Exactly. The skill isn't a trick for getting ahead. It's an accurate read of where you stand, and sometimes that read tells you to go build the piece you're missing before you chase the room.
Which is a less flattering ending than, and then you got the promotion, but it's the true one.
It usually is. And that's career strategy. A whole season of ideas condensed into 1 week's practical version. Take what's useful, leave what isn't.
Which is basically our advice for the whole season.
The room tells you everything if you're actually watching. This is EMPath. Every trick has a method, every show has a seam. This is Behind the Curtain.
We've spent 10 episodes pulling back the curtain on other people's work. Their workflows, their contracts, their onboarding, their pitch decks. Today we're turning that around.
Which is fair. We've been asking guests and listeners to hand us the parts of the job nobody puts in a highlight reel. Time to hand over ours.
This whole show runs on one idea. The stuff that shapes a career is usually invisible until someone points at it. So for the finale, we're pointing at us.
No polished pass on this one. Just what building this thing actually looked like from the inside.
Start with time, because it's the one nobody believes until they try it themselves. Beau, how long did you think this weekly show would actually take going in?
I figured a few hours a week. Record, edit, post. That's what it looks like from the outside, and that's what I told people it'd be.
Same. And the real number is embarrassing to say out loud, so I'll just go ahead and say it. Some weeks this show eats 20, 25 hours, and that's before either of us has said a word into the microphone.
Scripting alone eats a full day if it's going well. If it's not going well, it eats two. And you're rewriting a segment at midnight the night before we record, which happened more than once this season, and neither of us said anything about it publicly until right now. We just showed up the next morning like it was fine.
And that's before factoring in research. Some weeks I'm reading trade reports at midnight trying to find one more data point that actually holds up because we won't put something on air we can't stand behind. Same with fact-checking upcoming episodes against past episodes, making sure we're not repeating ourselves, making sure every claim traces back to something real. That part alone can eat an evening.
And none of that includes the actual thinking time. Living with an idea before it becomes an outline, which sounds lazy from the outside, but is genuinely where most of the real work happens.
Which nobody counts because it doesn't produce a document. You can't point to 2 hours of staring at a wall and call it deliverable, even when it's the 2 hours that actually counted.
Let's talk about the 45 minutes, because that number sounds so clean on paper and it has never once been clean in practice.
Oh my goodness, it's brutal. Every segment has a time target, and every single week at least one of them fights us. Either we're 4 minutes short or scrambling to add something real instead of filler. We're 8 minutes over and something has to go.
And cutting something you already said and liked never feels good, even when it's the right call for the runtime.
There's a version of this episode's deep dive that ran almost 4 minutes longer before we trimmed it down. You'd never know which 4 minutes, and that's kind of the point.
What actually got cut, though, since we're doing full transparency here?
An extra discipline in the lightning round. We had a bit written for advertising in the first half and moved it to the reveal instead because the pacing needed it more there.
Which nobody would have noticed if we didn't just tell them. That's basically the whole season's thesis happening in real time on the show.
Let's talk about recording, because the polished version people hear is never the first take. It's rarely even the third.
We've had a dog bark through an entire take. We've had a delivery show up mid-sentence. We've had one of us just lose the thread completely and have to restart a whole segment from the top because we couldn't stop cracking up.
Infant structure.
Infant structure tripped us up multiple episodes.
Which is a very fancy way of saying we were both low-key exhausted, and it showed. And we knew it the second we listened back.
Or how about the first episode where I thought I sounded like Yoda for a line? We ended up using that as an outtake because it was so funny.
Which is a small thing, but it's exactly the kind of thing that this whole show is about. The polish would have been easy, but leaving it in was the truer choice.
What got us through weeks like that was mostly just the two of us checking in on whether the other one was actually okay, not just performing okay for the mic.
Which sounds small, but some weeks that was the entire difference between finishing the episode and not finishing it.
And here's the part that's the hardest to say plainly. None of this is paid. Not the writing, not the recording, not the editing, not the show notes. Which is not a complaint. It's a fact we thought you deserve to know. Especially on a show that spends this much time telling other people to value their own work too.
Not even the announcer, who luckily volunteers to read our ever-changing bumpers every week.
Which is a choice, and one we truly appreciate.
We definitely do. What was the single hardest week of the season for you, and why that one?
Episode 6, Easy. Not because the topic was hard, but because I recorded it running on almost no sleep after having a friend visiting, and I could hear myself reaching for words that weren't there. We kept most of it. I still wince at a couple spots.
I know exactly which 2 spots. And nobody's ever mentioned them, which tells us something about how much louder our own mistakes are to us than anyone listening.
My turn. Same question back, but different angle. What's the one thing about making this show you'd change if we could rewind to episode 1 and do it differently?
I'd have built the segment structure a little differently and probably shortened the show.
Aw man, shorten the show? How would we get all this good info out then? Is there anything you almost cut from this season that you're glad you kept?
The whole chain of title episode. It felt needed, yet too technical, too legal, not creative enough for a creative show. But it became one of the most responded to episodes we've made. I read the room wrong on that one.
which is a nice humbling note to land on in a segment about reading structure. Even the people teaching it get it wrong sometimes.
2 more, and then we stop, because I could do this all day, and we have a runtime. What's the thing you learned this season that you'll actually use in your own work?
Needs analysis, episode 10, without question. I try to use that with every project now.
That's the best possible outcome for a show like this, that the people making it are also the people using it. Last one.
What's the thing you want someone to still be thinking about a month from now, after they've forgotten every specific example we gave?
That the confusion they feel walking into a new room doesn't mean they don't belong there. It's information. Every room has a structure nobody explained, and feeling lost in it is the first step to reading it.
That's the one. If somebody takes only that out of 11 episodes, we did the job.
Okay, actually one more, because I want this on record before the season closes. What made you say yes to this in the first place? You had no reason to. It doesn't pay, and it eats your weekends.
Because nobody explained any of this to me when I was coming up, I figured out the invisible parts the slow way, on set, by getting it wrong in front of people. If a show like this shortens that for somebody else, by even a year or a month, that's my reason.
Same. That's why this show was created, which is probably why it worked. We got the information as we went along and decided that was something we could help others with.
Fair. And now you have to answer one. Since you started this whole question thing, would you do a second season knowing everything you know about what it actually cost? And not to mention we spoke about season 2 on the last episode.
Yes, and faster than I said yes the last time. Because the first season we were guessing. Season 2 we actually know what we're building and what it takes to build it, which I feel is a better starting point.
Which is a season 1 skill applied to season 2. We can finally read our own structure before we're standing inside it.
We built an entire season on reading invisible structures, and we somehow didn't clock our own until we sat down to record this segment.
That's true, actually. If you'd asked either of us in week 3 what invisible move we were personally living inside, neither of us could have told you.
Constraint, probably looking back. 45 minutes, 7 segments, 1 episode every single week, whether the week cooperated with us or not.
Constraint that we chose, though, which is the part that actually stands out here. Nobody made us keep the runtime tight. We did that on purpose because the show is better for it.
Even on the weeks it made us miserable?
Even then, that's probably the most honest place to leave this. The season taught you 10 moves, and then 1 skill underneath all of them. And we've been living inside that same skill the entire time and still showing up.
Which is either the least glamorous ending to a season finale segment ever recorded, or exactly the right one.
We'll let you decide.
The scene was always there. Now you've seen it. This is EMPath. Step back, look again. What changes when the perspective shifts? This is Perspective Reset.
So here we are. 10 moves, 1 skill, a whole season of episodes that turned out to be the same lesson wearing different clothes. What does it actually feel like to sit at the end of that?
A little strange, if I'm being real. You spend 10 weeks thinking you're teaching 10 separate things, and then the finale tells you it was one thing all along. Makes you wonder what else you've been treating as separate that isn't.
That's the real gift of a season like this, though. Not the 10 moves. The fact that once you've got the underlying skill, you start seeing where else it applies, completely outside the fields we covered.
Give me an example, because I want to know where you've caught yourself using it outside of work.
Well, for instance, at the coffee shop. Watching a barista handle a complicated order is a structure reading exercise now. There's a stated request and an unstated one underneath it, usually about the time or patience. And once you notice that, you can't unnotice it.
Mine's similar to that. Grocery store checkout lines. You can read which line is actually fastest by watching who's got a full cart, but is clearly done shopping, versus who's still deciding between 2 products. It's needs analysis with a shopping basket.
Which is a perfectly normal example of why this skill doesn't stay contained to a career. Once you have the eye, it runs everywhere, whether you want it to or not.
Is that a good thing, though? Because there's a version of this where you never get to just enjoy a scene, a pitch, a conversation, without your brain quietly diagramming the structure underneath it.
That's a real cost, and we should mention it instead of pretending this skill is only a gift. Once you're reading structure everywhere, some things stop being simple. You notice too much to ever fully relax in a room again.
I've noticed that in myself watching other people's magic acts. Used to just enjoy the show. Now I'm half watching the trick and half reverse engineering the misdirection, and it's a genuinely different experience than the one I had as a kid.
Which is the trade nobody warns you about when they tell you to build expertise. You get the skill, and you lose a little bit of the wonder that made you want the skill in the first place.
Which is maybe why nobody puts a name on it. Giving it a name makes it something you have to carry on purpose instead of something that just happens to you.
And that's the trade this whole season has been quietly asking you to make. Give up a little bit of that unbothered ease, and get a much clearer read on what's actually happening around you.
I'd take that trade, Even on the nights it makes me tired, I'd rather see the room clearly than float through it.
Same. And it connects to something we admitted earlier this episode. We didn't clock our own invisible move until we sat down to write about it. That's how quiet this skill is, and even for the two people hosting the show about it.
Which should be reassuring for anyone listening who feels behind. If the hosts of the show about noticing structure needed a whole season to notice their own, nobody's actually behind.
That's a genuinely comforting way to put it. This was never a skill you either have or you don't. It's a skill you're always in the middle of catching up to, no matter how long you've been doing the work.
10 industries, 10 moves, 1 eye. If there's a single thing to carry out of this season, it's that the eye was always yours to begin with.
And that we didn't hand it to you today, we just finally gave it a name. What you do with it from here in your own field, on your own projects, was always going to be up to you.
Which is a good place to leave it before we close things out properly.
Clarity changes direction. This is EMPath.
So that's season 1. 10 moves, 1 skill. A lot more honesty about how this show gets made than either of us expected to give away today. And I wrote half of it. But that's kind of the whole point of a show built on invisible structure. Eventually, you have to turn the lens on yourself.
When we started the show, we thought we were making something about creative work. Turns out we were making something about how creative people learn to see. And the work was just where we kept finding proof of it.
Which we didn't plan, for the record. Nobody sits down in week 1 and says, let's spend a season quietly building toward 1 meta skill. It just kept showing up no matter what field we picked.
Season 2 is going to build directly on top of this. If Season 1 taught you to see the structure, Season 2 is the next level of the curriculum, actually using that eye on purpose.
Which is a different kind of hard than noticing something. Noticing is instinct. Using it deliberately on a deadline under pressure is a whole separate skill we haven't built yet, and we're not pretending we've mastered it either.
There's one loose thread we want to close before we go, though, because we've been circling it since episode 7, and it's not fair to just leave it hanging into a hiatus.
The AI question. What it does to creative jobs long term once the dust settles.
Right. Back in this episode's lightning round, we said nobody's finished learning what the tool even is yet, including the people building it. That's true, and it's also not an excuse to keep dodging the question forever.
So here's the commitment. Season 2 opens with real data on this. Not speculation, not vibes, not us guessing. Actual numbers reported from sources.
We're not promising an answer, because anyone promising you a clean answer to this question right now is selling you something. We're promising an honest look at the best data that exists the day we sit down to research it.
Which is the only kind of promise this show has ever really made. Not answers, just an honest look at the structure, wherever that look leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable.
So that's Season 1 closed out. 10 moves, 1 skill, and a season's next chapter already waiting on the other side of a short break.
Neon Alchemy says story is how companies become human. Feels like the right note to end a season on, since that's basically what we spent 11 episodes proving about people too.
Thank you for spending 45 minutes a week with 2 people and a microphone. Though some weeks that went a lot smoother than others, it genuinely means more than the runtime lets us say.
See you next season.
Season 2 drops after the break. Thank you for listening to EMPath.
Feel the creativity.
The path gets clearer 1 week at a time. This is EMPath.
EMPath is a partner podcast of Neon Alchemy BV. Story is how companies become human. We handle that part.